Well, hello everyone. This is Carmen with Coffee with Carmen, having iced coffee today from Starbucks. Shauna brought us one.
Oh, Jenna did.
Oh, Jenna.
I opted out. I wasn't
she
feeling
opted
it.
out, but Jenna brought it. I'm sorry.
Which is nearly a crime. I don't know why I said no.
Oh my gosh. All right, so all of you go get your favorite cup of coffee and make sure it's an iced one because it's hot out there. I know I mentioned that. And I'm not going to talk about the weather today because I did that last time. But our topic today. Oh, and guess who's with us today? Jenna and Shauna and myself, which I'm excited because, you know, I don't mind talking to the camera by myself and carrying a conversation on my own, but it's
nice to be together.
It's nice to be together, and you know, it's good. So, our topic today is about God's promise and what that means. And God's promise, sometimes we have to hold on tight to see that promise. But we're all going to share different things that, you know, we were thinking about, things we've had to hold on to, and so I'm gonna.
Jenna.
So I was really excited to talk about this because I think so often, like, our idea of what God's promises are like, it's just kind of like this elusive thing that is out there that, like, God says it, but like,
is that one for me?
Yeah. Do I actually, in my heart, fully, truly, and believe it?
Yeah.
Like, it's one thing to hear it, and be like, okay, like, I'm reading it in the Bible, and it says it, but, like, do I walk in a way that I actually believe it?
Yeah.
And so, when I was kind of, like, searching in the Bible for this, when you mentioned the topic, and I came across Lazarus, and the story of when
Did we mention the topic? Did you say?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I don't know why I was like, wait, we did share that, right?
We did.
Talking about believing God's promises.
Yeah.
So yeah, the story of Lazarus and when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, and the idea that, you know, they thought, well, they were upset at Jesus, like, why weren't you here? If you were here, he wouldn't have died. And so to me, I was thinking about that. I was like, you know, in their heads, they had this idea of how things were going to go.
Mm-hmm.
And Lazarus had died, and then, of course, they were sad, and they were mourning that, and the emotions that come with that. And in their heads, they thought it was over. They thought it was all done with.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and if you put yourself in their shoes, and you've had a situation happen in your life where you're like, God, there's no other way. Like, it's all, like, he's dead. You know, that's it. That's the end. But Jesus comes in and is like, you know, if I had been here, then you wouldn't have believed. And it's like, he gave them, basically allowed that to happen, to allow them to believe.
Yeah.
And so that's where I started thinking about my own life and some of the things that have happened as far as challenges or obstacles or things that happen in a way that, like, I feel like that's the end of it. Like, there's no hope. There's nothing to look forward to in any way. And it feels like it's over. But that's when Jesus is going to step in. And so it's really believing that. Like, because you have to believe all the promises that he tells you. Believing that God is good. Believing that God has a purpose. Believing these simple things, like really internalizing them in those moments where it feels like it's over.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I came across. I know you had some thoughts, Shauna,
on Lazarus?
Lazarus too. We talked about Lazarus and Jesus weeping.
Yeah. I just, so are you talking about what I shared before? Okay, yeah. I had heard someone speaking about Lazarus and how Jesus cried when he had heard the news. And it's just, it was crazy to me because I've never thought about the fact that he knew that everything was going to be okay.
Yeah.
Like, because he was Jesus, because he's God.
Yeah.
And yet he still mourned his friend in that moment. Mm-hmm. And it was encouraging and just a reminder to me that even while believing the promises of God, holding on to the promises of God, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to experience different emotions or struggle with things that are happening in life or with the people close to me.
Yeah.
I can still process stuff or experience things or whatever it may be, while still holding on to the promise of God, even if I'm hurting about something in my life at that moment. And I never thought about that before. I mean, I thought, well, Jesus loved him, but I didn't really relate that to my own life. And I just always, things are very black and white for me sometimes. And so when we talk about holding on to the promises of God, okay, believe, have faith, you think positive, positive, positive. And yet there's Jesus, like he knew what was going to happen, and he still was sad that his friend passed away.
Right. And I know in my lifetime, there's been so many things that, I remember when my older boys were younger and I was reading the Word, and as I was reading the Word, it was like God was showing me that how through generations in the Word He kept His promise, and how, even, and I know lately, I've been bringing up Joshua a lot, but it's because, I went back to read it again. Because sometimes you gotta go back and read it, especially when, I remember when they were younger and they first started, like, the home, getting to learn music. These are my two little boys. And how God I was reading about the different tribes and how, each tribe had to give to the Levites. And I had to ask God, well, why is that? So then it was like God showed me, well, they're the ones that were teaching my word. They're the ones that were, like, their position was to reveal me to the people. So because of that, they had, even though I didn't give them land or didn't give them this, the other tribes had to give to them. And that was God's way of showing them that He was keeping His promise, for the fact that they were the ones living out the word, like teaching the word and being in the word, and and the praises and all of that. So I remember things I did tell my older two boys, and I think they were like 8 and 9, 9 and 10, I don't remember. And I'm like, you guys are Levites. Our family, that's who we are, and through the years I held on to that. And I'm just seeing that God has used my family for that and has kept that promise. And so I went back to read, Joshua again, because I was thinking about that. And then social media, I did post a scripture, and it was the scripture from Joshua. And it was basically where it was saying how God kept His promises from generation to generation. And it was Joshua 20, chapter 21, verses 43 to 45. And it said, so the Lord gave Israel all the land where He had sworn to give to their fathers and ancestors, and they took possession of it and lived it. The Lord gave the rest from conflict on every side in accordance to everything that He had sworn to their fathers, and not one of all their enemies stood before them in battle. The Lord handed over all their enemies to them. Not one of the good not one of the good promises which the Lord had spoken to the house of Israel failed, and now had come to pass. So when I put that there, because that's what I have always believed through everything that has happened through me, like being married and not being married, and holding on to God and holding on to His promises. And I held on to that because knowing that God made that promise, and I just because I believed in it, so I just continued to hold on to it. So I thought, I'm going to post this because this is something that I've stood, and God has shown me that He's kept these promises. And not that things are perfect, like you said, like Jesus wept. Why? Because He loves us, and we talked about that last time.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I saw how I got a lot of feedback on it. And I started thinking, well, if everyone is saying, I like this word, I like on the post what you shared, are you believing it for your family?
Yeah.
And this is why I started thinking about it, because I'm thinking, like, if people are saying, I like this, or I love it, or even posting positive comments, how much of that are you believing for yourself and your family? Because Joshua had to, through that time where, the other tribes didn't believe it. So he had to live through the wilderness and hold on to that promise.
Yeah.
And then because he did, God was like, okay, now it's your turn. And then He went back and reminded all the tribes this is what God said. This is His word. And because we're walking in it, He will give it all to us.
Yeah.
You know, and and that's part of the reason why I was like, we got to talk about it. You know.
Yeah.
And I know you said, you know, you had a scripture that you wanted to share that. You know, we're all talking about different scriptures, but they're all tying into God's promise.
Yeah. Well, not funny enough, I knew we had talked about, you mentioned wanting to share a little bit more about what you were reading in Joshua for this video. And so I thought, well, that would be good. I'll go back through Joshua as well. So I started there. And I don't know, I was like, you know what, like, but is this what you want me to share? Like, like what would you, like, I'm going to open my mouth. What do you want me to say? So I Googled, good old Google, promises, God's promises for generations, and a verse that popped up was in Genesis, and I'll read it. It's Genesis 17:7, and it says, "And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you, and your descendants after you in their generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and your descendants after you." So it's talking about how He's going to establish a covenant and how He's going to bring this blessing not only to us but to generations. So I was telling Jenna before we started that I oftentimes will look up verses like hope or, you know, a topical type thing, but I also like to know the backstory and where it's coming from and what was happening in that, like where is that verse in the context to the bigger picture. So I went to Genesis 17, but then I actually went back one to chapter 16. So in Genesis, this is talking about Abraham and Sarah, and which is a more familiar story for those that are in their word and or have been to church. Some people might not know about it, but Abraham and Sarah were holding on to the promise of having a child. But it wasn't working, or it wasn't happening in their time. It hadn't happened yet.
Yeah.
Sarah ends up basically offering her maidservant to see if they could have a child that way. So her name is Hagar, if I'm saying it right. She took things into her own hands.
Like we do sometimes.
Seriously, like this is a very impacting. There's so many different ways you could do a teaching on this particular story. Now I have kind of breezed past Hagar a lot before. I mean, it's not the most significant piece of this story when I think about Abraham and Sarah and talking about the promises of God and different things happening. But let me read a couple verses. So from chapter 16, so what happened is Hagar did become pregnant, but because she became pregnant, Sarah got upset. And once it actually happened, Sarah was like, actually, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm not okay with this. And treated Hagar so poorly that she actually ran away. She left. And in verse 7, so Genesis chapter 16, verse 7, it says, "The angel of the Lord found her by a spring in the wilderness. And he said to her, 'Where have you come from and where are you going?' And she replied, 'I'm running away from my mistress, Sarah.'" And then a couple verses later, in verse 11, the angel of the Lord tells her that she will conceive and have a son. And that, hold on, I'm trying to find it. Verse 10, sorry, let me back up one. "The angel of the Lord said to her, 'I will greatly multiply your offspring, and they will be too many to count.'" So in this is a new Bible for me, like I was telling you guys, so I'm really excited, but it's like a devotional Bible. So there's some teachings and different things, and I was reading about Hagar, and the thing that was popping out to me is the angel of the Lord gave her a word that she was going to have a son, but that the generations, she would have so many, like the blessing to follow would be too many to count. And if you think about the situation that she was in a situation that she didn't want to be in. Something had happened in her life that it wasn't her choice, that she didn't really have any power over it. Actually, someone else made the decision for her, which is insane. I've definitely been in positions where I felt like I wasn't in control, or something happened in life that there wasn't anything that I could do about it. And she was in so much pain and so distraught that she actually ran away. And even still then, in the midst of that pain and making what we could seemingly say was the wrong choice, or you shouldn't have done that, or whatever, you know, an angel of the Lord met her in that place in the wilderness and still gave that promise to her. And, you know, a lot of times for me growing up and hearing about the promises of God, naturally I believed it would be when I was doing something good, or as I'm being in faith, as I'm following God's word. Maybe some unhealthy belief systems that promises of God were conditional, which they're not. And this kind of proves it. Even if we're in the midst of pain, or even if we're experiencing something in life that wasn't by choice, that God's promises are still true for us, and not just for us, but for the generations to come after us. And there's so much more, you know, to share about Hagar. I just thought it was crazy that he met her there in the wilderness. I know that there's been times where I have felt in my life that I've been in a wilderness, where I wasn't where I wanted to be or thought I would be, and maybe was intentionally separating myself or isolating myself and trying to process through things. And yet I know that God's heart so much is for me and loves me so much. Oh, getting choked up. That wherever I am,
Carmen's rubbing off on
I know, darn you, I've never gotten choked up on a video. Like, who was Hagar? She was a slave. She was a servant. Why would she have deserved that? She, you know, it's nothing that she did that earned the favor of God. You know, sure, somebody could argue it maybe, but it really impacted me. I never thought about her and the blessing that she received and how God met her in that place and what he did for her, even though.
And God does meet us where we're at, and he reminds us that he gives us a promise every day.
Yeah.
We just have to believe, continue to believe in his promises. And when you're in the word and you're reading it, you continue to read stories like that where God kept his promise. He came through.
Yeah.
He, without a doubt, just because why? Because there was that one person that was willing to say, you know what, I believe.
Yeah.
No, I believe.
Yeah.
And because of that, it carried on. And God, you know, is always asking us, are you going to believe? Are you going to move forward? Because people are always watching. They're always watching. Because why? Because, you know, people always, we all go through stuff. And there's times when people are believing like they don't go through anything. But they really don't know the true story. And when they're watching you and then later realize, wow, all that was happening, but yet we never knew because she kept believing. She kept, you know, saying all the right things. And it wasn't that we say the right things, we were believing that God is working.
Yeah.
And that's how he is, and that's how I know with me, I do believe that because I did hold on to God. I even used to tell God sometimes, like, even if I'm just touching your garment, you know, like that story where she just said, if I just touch the, you know, the bottom of his garment, like he's gonna, you know, take this from me. And because she believed it, she knew it was a promise because she believed it.
So was that the woman?
The woman
with the issue of the blood.
With the issue of blood, yeah. So we all have issues, but you know, we're just holding on. It doesn't matter. We're just dangling. At least we're hanging on.
Yeah.
You know, to that promise.
Yeah.
So I know you want to share something. You can tell.
Yeah, there was. I also read. So I was reading a lot on this. Jesus and Thomas, right after Jesus came back. And Thomas
doubting Thomas.
Yeah, he didn't believe it, and he was like, "I'll only believe it if I can put my hands on it." And so Jesus, of course, allowed that to happen. And then he says, I think it's John. I wrote it. John 20:27. Blessed are those who have not seen yet believed. So oftentimes, right, our circumstances or things that are happening around us don't align with what we're expecting to happen. And then it's like, we have a choice to make. We can choose, am I going to continue on the path and keep believing that God is faithful and God's going to see me through, or do I give up and stop and continue to do my own thing or try to figure it out on my own? When my own, and then I also have another verse, Proverbs 19:21, that talks about, where is it? I'm going to read it. Many are the plans in a man's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. So it's like we have this choice in those moments when things don't happen the way that we see them happening or the way that we believe they're going to happen, that is an opportunity to grow our faith. And so instead of seeing it like, now I'm going to start doubting, or now I'm going to give up, or now I'm going to, whatever you want to think, that's the moment where you can say, God, I know you see me. I know you hear me. I trust that it'll happen in your time, not mine. And so that's, I think, the challenge is you've held on to that. You hold on to that through the years. And God is going to bless it. He says, blessed are those who have not seen yet believed. So the circumstances don't always align. But that's the moment we can choose, okay, I'm still going to believe.
Absolutely.
It does make sense. It makes total sense. I mean, because, so I've often have heard this, like, I've heard, like, preachers say this, like, when you get up in the morning, you turn your car on and you're going to get from A to B, and you're trusting that you're going to get there. But you don't know what's going to happen. You just know you have to get to work. So it's one of those things where we wake up and God's is saying, like, what do you think is taking you from A to B? It is me. It's not that car. And I've heard that said, but it's relatable. Like, people can identify with that because on the way there, you don't know what's going to happen. But God knows, and you're trusting that you're going to be safe. That you're going to be safe getting there, and that you're going to continue to, that job's going to provide. And God's saying, hello, I'm the provider. I'm the one keeping that promise. And I think that everyone watching knows that last year was a time where anything and everything you thought you believed in, or you knew was going to happen, or goals that you had during that season, they kind of stopped. And then because God was showing all of us, like, you know what? I'm in charge. And that's the way I always saw it. Like, through that season, I knew God was in charge, and I never, like, doubted anything. I don't know, like, I was just like, okay, God, you know what's going on, so I'm just going to keep moving with you, and whatever you ask me to do through this season, I'm going to do it. And I did, and it never stopped me from moving forward. No matter what it was. And so I'm a little weird like that.
I think initially it's hard because I know there's been times where we've had conversations and I'm like, Carmen, I don't see it. I don't know how. I don't, like, and so for me, I'll be transparent. It's been hard. It's difficult sometimes. And so, but the thing is, you'll have one moment or one instance where God comes through. And I've had this more recently in the past few years. And I hold on to that for those moments in the future, because there will be times that I'm like, God, I have no idea. I don't know how I'm going to get through this. I don't know how I'm going to do this. How is this going to play out? But I can look back and see all those moments where God was like, I'm right here with you. Even the fact Lazarus was already dead, like, Jesus already knew that,
Right.
He already knew. He's already following all of this. Like, he waited until afterwards because that gave them a chance to believe. So it's like, I just have to hold on to it.
Right. Even when it looks like it's a dead end, and then all of a sudden God's like, no, it's not.
Or even if we take things, where we attempt to take things into our own hands.
Like
Sarah and Abraham.
I know.
Which is crazy. So when you were talking,
when you were talking, what did
don't.
you say last time?
I have not forgotten that.
When you were
we were talking, sharing, and speaking, or something like that.
On
the last video, I said all 3 words like a weirdo, and then I caught myself, and I was like, why? No, it's funny. I literally thought about that the other day, and I was like, why? But I did want to share, Jenna, when you were talking, you were saying like, talking about not quitting, and just how sometimes we can't see the end in sight or what's forward. I read it was like one of those inspirational posts, like somebody posted, it's a short story on Facebook or somewhere, and it was a dad and daughter driving through a storm, like in Colorado or somewhere, and it was getting really bad, and it was escalating, and she kept asking her dad, should I pull over? And as they were moving along, everyone, like a lot of cars, slowly but surely, as it kept getting worse, kept pulling over. And I've definitely been in storms like that in Washington State, and I was reading this, having no idea what the end was going to be like. I was like, maybe you should have pulled over. So it keeps going, and she's like, Dad, what about now? Like, the temperatures were dropping. This was like a long road trip, getting worse, and said, keep driving. And she said, I couldn't understand why he told me to keep driving, and we kept driving, and eventually they got out of the worst part of it and through the other side of the mountain or whatever. And he said, I want you to look in your rearview mirror. She's like, okay. And so she did, and she looks back, and he said, everybody who pulled over and quit are still stuck in that storm. And I was like, oh, it's so good.
So good, yeah.
So I was like, I hate it when I read stories like that, but it's got the punchline at the end, and it's so good. Wait, hold on, I wanted to share more. So, wait, no, I want to try and tie it together. So I was like, dang, like, so we hear, like, we can't quit, you have to keep going, like, trust God, all this stuff, but I never thought about the fact that, like, giving up, we think that's the failure, and we quit, but I never actually had this mental picture of, if I do that, I stay stuck in that storm. My little ones are popping in. Stay out, not go away.
We did the video.
Not right now. So I was thinking about, hold on, Bubba, seriously, hold on. So I was thinking about Hagar, and from the little, you guys can't see it, but on this side of the page is like this little devotional, and then this is Genesis and the chapters. It talks about how she was in the wilderness, and how when the angel came and found her, he addressed her. He didn't say, Hagar, why are you here? He said, basically said, like, Sarah's servant. I'm maybe wording it wrong, or servant of Sarah, but he addressed her in that way. And they were mentioning that they believed that that was important, that she was addressed that way, because shortly after he spoke with her, he then gave her an instruction to go back.
Right.
To go back to Sarah, and was kind of establishing who she was, and that there was an authority in her life, and that where she wasn't where she should be, to go back. She was able to take a promise with her. She was going to have a son, but to go back. So tying all of this in, I was just thinking, like, having faith and not quitting, and it is going to take action and being intentional on our part to keep moving forward. And I think that's maybe like the tough love part of it, because we want it to be easier. We want it to work out when we don't see the end in sight. But even in the midst of a trial, I mean, can you imagine how she felt in that moment to be told, like, you need to go back? Like, you need to go back to that person who is being cruel to you. You need to go back to what you never chose for your own life. Like, I mean, we could go on and on about that, but that was the instruction. Like, we still need to be obedient. And so, again, it just, I was thinking about, like, not quitting, and what does that mean? And being obedient, and still maybe not seeing the end in sight. But even in the trials, like, this is a great, I remember what I wanted to say. I wanted to say all of that, but the initial verse I read was from chapter 17. It was past Hagar. I only found Hagar, I didn't find her, but when I went to see what the verse was in context, but this promise of establishing the covenant was actually for Abraham. So all through this whole trial and all these things taking place and direction being given, everyone that was in the midst of all of that, Abraham and Sarah, who took things into their own hands, Hagar, who ran away, all of these pieces and elements taking place, they all still had a blessing from God, and God was in the midst of every part of it for every person who didn't know the end at first. But thankfully, they continued on with Jesus. They got out of that storm and they received their promise, and
Yeah.
it was cool.
And I know when you were talking about the story about the girl and the dad saying, keep going, keep going. I think that, you know, when I was thinking about, like when they were in the storm with Jesus in the boat, and Jesus is sleeping, and they're like,
This dude,
like, why is he sleeping?
yeah.
But it's one of those things where, you know, we have to remember that he's always in it.
He was still there.
He was still there.
Just not the way that they wanted him to be.
But it's like we forget, and like just like they forgot, like they're walking with him. And when I think about these things, I'm like, God, like would I be that same person? Like they're walking with him, they're seeing all the, you know, how he's coming through and he's healing people, but people are believing and they're walking with him. But still, they're in the boat with him. It's like he's a part of their circle, and yet they're still fearful of the storm. And Jesus is like, tells the storm, like, calm down. Like he tells us, calm down.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm with you. And you know, and I do believe, like, you know, with Joshua, I'm sure, as he had to go through it with the ones who didn't believe, because he had to go through it in order to lead, to allow all of them to see God's promise. He had to hold on to that through it. And it's like, and every story we're sharing, someone had to hold on to believe.
Yeah.
And even the disciples that were in the boat, they were like, you know, panicking and stuff. And Jesus was like, told the storm, like, calm down. But at the same time, it's like he's telling us to calm down. Like, just calm down and listen to him. Just take that moment to know that I'm in control of every situation.
Yeah.
And there's, you know, and those things that you're believing in faith, I'm taking care of it, and I'm keeping my promise to you. And that's why that scripture that I read means so much to me. And I know in the chapter after that, and I didn't want to read it all, but the chapter after that, it's when Joshua, you know, then Joshua goes back and he reminds everyone of what Moses had said, every promise that God had kept, and how he's reminding them, isn't this what God said? And look what he's done for us. And he has not turned his back on us. And so he's been faithful to us, and he kept his promise. Why? Because we believed in it. And he's reminding each one of them, and each just kept going back. And because he wanted them to remember. Why? Because he was older in age, and he didn't want them to forget. Because we do forget. Every day that we wake up, we have to decide we're going to remember God's promise. It's kind of what Joshua was doing, reminding them. So, and that's why, like, when I was reading, I went back to read Joshua again. It's because God's reminding me, like, Carmen, I haven't forgotten the promises I have.
I was going to say it earlier, and I was like, I'm so mean.
But, you know, like, he's reminding us on a daily basis, don't forget. And as we remember, we don't forget. You know, our little ones, you know, you still have little ones. Mine just now, this year, both of them, you know, I don't have to take them to A, B, and C and back to A anymore. They're like doing it on their own. But you know what? You know, I know that God's like, he's taking care of them.
Yeah.
You know, I don't have to worry about it because they're at the point where God's taking them to A, B, and C and back to A again, and he's taking care of them, and he's watching over them, and I don't have to worry about it because he is with them. And these are the promises, and they're little things, but you know what? They're big things when it comes to a parent. You know, God, at the same time, they're hearing us, like, even our children, your little ones and my older ones, even as we sit here, you know, you, all of you don't see them, but the little ones are walking in, my older ones, and they're all watching and hearing. Because, and you know, it's good because they're at the moment where they're forgetting, they're gonna remember. Oh yeah, my mom said that. You know, God is reminding me of what my mom said because it's something that they had to hold on to. You know, they're holding on to that garment.
I think that's what it's about, though, is your ability to hold on and have that faith. Okay, then it's passed on to the next generation.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's really what it's all about, right? Is
And
like,
yeah, and that's what Joshua was doing. He was reminding them why, because he knows that he couldn't control their actions.
mm-hmm.
All he could do was remind them. And then, of course, the next book is Judges, so we all know why it's named that. But well, most of us do. And if you don't, go read Judges. I mean, there's a lot to learn
Yeah.
from it.
Yeah.
Just when they forget and they get tied into the wrong thing, which we're not. I know I've gotten tied into making the wrong decisions and stuff like that. So it's just a book of reminding, like, okay, when you fall away or when you make the wrong choice or where you think you're in control of something, things happen that are outside of God's circle, but then God brings you back, and that's what that book is all about. But Joshua knew why, because he had to make sure that they were walking in alignment by being that example and taking action. So he was doing the responsible thing like we do as parents, doing the responsible thing like reminding them.
Yeah.
So and hold on to that promise. So yeah.
I have
Now I got all stuffy because I was trying to cry.
one verse that I've been reading a lot lately. It says, "Whatever you ask for in prayer, believe you have received it, and it will be yours." It's Mark 11:24.
Yeah.
So with that, I'm thinking like, whatever you ask for in prayer, okay, God, like whatever I ask for. But then it's like, okay, is what I'm asking for in alignment? Like you said, is that in alignment with what God wants?
Mm-hmm.
So asking God to allow my heart to be aligned with His, right? Not with what I want, because I think that's where the hardship comes. Hagar fled to the wilderness because this isn't what I wanted. This isn't what I thought would happen.
You know what's good though, and I mentioned it, but she went back, so she was obedient.
She was obedient. Yeah.
And when you said that, it reminded me of Jesus when we talked about that when he was 12. And his parents went back. And he's like, well, I'm doing my Father's business. But at the same time, he was obedient to Joseph and Mary.
Yeah.
And still continued to be under them and he was their child, so he had to be obedient to his parents and walk with them, even though he knew his purpose. He still had to be obedient.
I think about what was going through his mind as a little kid. Like, how are you like God's son, yet you have these?
It must have been so hard. Like,
that's what I think. I mean, I can't imagine.
And the beautiful thing about it is, because I started thinking about a lot of things, and I thought, God, as a kid, he knew who he was in you. He spent that time with you through the every single day. He would talk with you and sit and just allow you to pour into him, and that's why you always knew his purpose, and that's why you're always asking us to do the same thing. And he was our example. So, and I know
The boys are getting loud.
but like God, because of Jesus being obedient to God and to his parents, God kept his promise through Jesus. But Jesus had to follow him and be in alignment with him and know his direction so that he would fulfill that promise for all of us. So, I don't know, there's just so much to the word. It's like a never-ending story. Like, there's always something exciting happening. Whether, even reading the struggles, we identify with them because we go through them, and then having to believe in it.
Yeah.
Having to believe in the next day. Okay, God, it's a new day. It's a new, the sun's out.
Yeah, it's a daily, like you said, you have to take action. It's a daily action that you have to do every day to make that choice of like, I'm still gonna keep believing.
I know. There's so many times where I don't want to keep going in a certain season or through a certain thing. And going back to that story about the daughter and the dad, I have heard a lot of people talk about, and I've had my own thoughts about quitting before. And I can say that in the past when I thought about quitting, that it more or less, it's kind of like, oh, well, I quit that sucked, but then as if that trial goes away or something, like, bummer, that was a failure or whatever. But I never thought or had a mental picture of me making that decision and actually still being stuck in that storm. Like, it doesn't go away. I don't know. It just caused me, when you just hear things sometimes and it just makes you reflect on something a little bit different than you never did before.
Yeah,
like
right.
that story, I was like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Because you could argue it the other way. Well, they were using wisdom and they were pulling off for safety. Depends on how you want to look at it. But it just, for me, I was like, that's very interesting.
Well, and then the piece of her listening to her dad.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
That's the thing. She obeyed what he was saying. Keep going, keep going, keep going. She didn't understand it. You know? And that's the thing is so oftentimes we think that by believing we're going to understand. No. Like, we may not understand or see it, but we have to believe it.
Yeah.
Even when we don't understand.
And I know me as a parent, and all my children will tell you this. Now, I'm not lying about this, but I've always had to let them know. I always tell them, if you start something, you have to finish.
Yeah.
And you can't quit. And so it's one of those things where you have to, and that's what God's saying, like, don't quit. You know, don't give up on me, because you know what? I have big plans. And just don't give up. Don't quit. And even us sitting here, I remember, we're sitting here and we're sharing, we're allowing God to use us, and God is, through us, He's reminding you, don't quit.
Yeah.
If He's asking you to do something, even if you don't understand it, just do it. Don't quit. Because you don't know why God is using you. You don't even if it's just saying yes to Him, and just don't give up.
Yeah.
He has a big plans. He has a big promise, and that's eternal life. I always take it back to that.
Yeah.
But it is
even more than we ask or imagine. I fall back on that. It's like my plans are nothing.
Yeah, like the scripture I have on my wall. For I know the plans I have for you, to give you peace and a future. So that's just saying, like, He knows.
Yeah.
Don't give up. Don't give up. He'll hold on. Hold on to those promises He's given you. I know God whispers promises to all of us.
Yeah.
Hold on to those promises.
Yeah. The only last thing I'll add, when I was reading about this, I think we brought it up on our last video, but it was a reminder to me that the promises that God has for us are true and real. They're always there, and it's not, the promises He has isn't dependent upon whether we're good or something we do or don't do. It's not a reflection of us. And we were talking about God's love and His grace and how Him extending His love and His grace to us, whether we deserve it or not. It's not a reflection of who we are.
Right.
And I was just being reminded again that Maddox, be quiet, I'm sorry. Little ones, they are very little. It was another reminder to me that those good things that He has planned for us always exist, and they're reflective of who He is, not who I might be in my trial or in my storm, because there's been a lot of times where I've been Hagar and I've tried to run away, or I've been Abraham and Sarah and tried to take things into my own hands. But it just was another reminder to me, like, they're always there. The goodness of God is always there, because He is good and He is God and He is everything that is pure and amazing. And it has nothing to do with my own trial, and He is just waiting to bless me. And it's gonna take me not quitting and keep going forward and being obedient and doing the hard things, but trusting, even when I don't know everything.
It's exciting.
It is exciting. And God's exciting.
It is exciting.
Yeah.
I'm so thankful for that. It's a
am.
relief.
Yeah.
Can I say that? Like, it is such a relief. Like,
Yeah.
oh, thank goodness.
I don't think I would have made it through some of the things without it. I don't. I just honestly don't. I don't know. I don't know how people do it.
Yeah.
Is there anything else?
No.
Well, I want to thank all of you who take time out of your time to sit down and to listen to what God is saying through us. Because this is all about God. This is all about us saying yes to God and not quitting.
Yep.
Because He has big plans, and we want you to know that He's with you and that He will always keep His promise to you in every generation. Because that's what His Word says, and His Word does not lie. And I just want to say again, thank you for watching. Invite people, share what we're doing, and say, there's these women who, are talking about Jesus,
With
about
kids
God.
in the background.
So but and I just want to say thank you again, and always remember that there's always hope.